When I walked into that courtroom wearing a suit that was 30 years out of style, my daughter covered her mouth to hide a giggle, and my son-in-law shook his head in open disgust, looking at me like I was something he had stepped in on the sidewalk. But then the judge looked up from his file, and his face went completely pale. His hand trembled as he gripped the gavel, and he whispered into the dead silence, "My God, is that really him?" Everyone turned and stared at the old man in the cheap shoes. No one in that room knew who I truly was. Until that exact moment, no one knew that the man they were trying to declare incompetent was the same man who used to make the mob tremble, but to understand how I ended up putting my own family in handcuffs. I have to take you back to the morning. My life was stolen from me. My name is Tom Calloway. I am 70 years old, and I live in a farmhouse on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado, that I built with my own 2 hands 40 years ago while I used to live there. Until 6 months ago, when my wife Martha passed away from a stroke, leaving me alone in a house that suddenly felt way too big and way too quiet. It was 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, and I was sitting at my kitchen table staring at a piece of burnt toast and a mug of black coffee, the way Martha used to hate it. She always said, "Tom, you drink coffee like you are punishing yourself." But that was just the habit of an old federal prosecutor who spent too many late nights chasing bad guys. I was just about to take a sip when the front door burst open. There was no knock, no doorbell, just the sound of the lock disengaging and the heavy boots of 4 people storming into my sanctuary. I stood up, knocking my chair over my heart, hammering against my ribs, thinking it was a home invasion, thinking I needed to get to the shotgun in the hall closet. But when I saw who it was, I realized it was something much worse than a robbery. It was my daughter Rachel and her husband Gavin. Flanking them were 2 large men in white uniforms who looked more like bouncers than medical professionals. Rachel was wearing a designer trench coat and oversized sunglasses, even though it was overcast outside, and Gavin looked like he always did, wearing a suit that cost more than my truck, and a sneer that he usually tried to hide, but today he was wearing it openly. I asked them what in the hell they were doing, breaking into my house without calling. Rachel refused to look me in the eye. She just stared at the wall, inspecting the paint peeling near the ceiling. But Gavin stepped forward and tossed a thick stack of papers onto the kitchen table right on top of my burnt toast. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. He told me to sit down. "Tom," he called me Tom. Never Dad, never Sir. Just Tom, with a tone of voice you would use on a disobedient child, he said. "This is an emergency guardianship order signed by a judge this morning. You are coming with us." Looked at the papers and then at my daughter. I asked her if this was a joke. I told her I was perfectly fine, that I just had my physical last month. But she finally looked at me, and I saw something cold in her eyes. Something that scared me more than the 2 goons standing by the door. She said, "Dad, look at you, look at this place. You are forgetting things. You left the stove on last week. You got lost in the supermarket. We are doing this for your own good, because you cannot take care of yourself anymore." I felt a flash of rage, hot and sharp. The stove incident was a lie, or rather a manipulation. Rachel had come over for tea, and when I went to the bathroom, she had turned the gas on just slightly enough to make a smell so she could accuse me of being senile. And the supermarket incident, I had walked the long way around the aisles to avoid running into one of Gavin's creditors, who I knew was looking for him. I looked at Gavin, and I saw him smirking. He leaned in close, his expensive cologne filling my nose, and whispered, so only I could hear. He said, "Stop fighting it, old man. This pigsty you call a home is sitting on land valued at $2.5 million, and my company needs a cash injection fast. So you are going to go to the nice facility, and we are going to liquidate this asset before the bank takes my condo." There it was, the truth. Naked and ugly. It was never about my health or my safety. It was about the money. It was always about the money. With Gavin, he ran some tech startup that burned through cash like a wildfire, and he had been hinting for months that I should sell the farm and move into a condo in the city so he could manage the proceeds. I had always said no, because this land was where Martha and I raised our family, where her ashes were scattered in the rose garden. I told him to get out of my house. I told him I knew my rights, and that an emergency order required immediate danger, which there was not. I tried to reach for the landline phone on the wall to call my lawyer, but the bigger of the two orderlies stepped in front of me, blocking my path like a wall of white polyester. Gavin laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He pointed at the sink where the dishes from last night were still sitting. "Soaking in soapy water," he said. "Look at that filth living in squalor. That is evidence of self-neglect, Tom. The judge agreed that you are a danger to yourself living in these sanitary conditions," I shouted. That it was just dinner dishes from one night. But it did not matter. The narrative was already written in their heads, or at least in the lies they told the court. I looked at Rachel, pleading with her silently, reminding her of the tire swing in the backyard of the nights. I helped her with her homework, of the father who paid for that expensive college degree she was not using. She turned her back to me, pulling her coat tighter, as if the air in my house was toxic. I decided to fight. I am 70 years old, but I am not frail. I grew up on a ranch, and I spent 30 years fighting organized crime. I lunged for the gap between the orderlies, trying to get to the back door, but I was not as fast as I used to be. One of them grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back with practiced efficiency. Pain shot up my shoulder, and I gasped, forcing me to bend over the kitchen table, my cheek pressed against the cool wood. I felt a sharp prick in my neck, a needle. Gavin nodded to the medic holding the syringe and said, "Give him the full dose. We need him compliant for the transport." I felt the cold liquid entering my bloodstream, and I knew I only had seconds before the darkness took me. As my legs began to give out, and they dragged me across the floor of the home I built, I saw my dog Buster, an old golden retriever who had been sleeping by the stove, wake up and bark, confused and scared. He trotted over, wagging his tail, trying to see why his master was on the floor. Gavin did not even break stride. He kicked Buster hard in the ribs, sending the old dog yelping and skidding across the linoleum floor into the cabinets. Hearing my dog cry out in pain broke something inside me that the betrayal of my children had not quite shattered. Yet I tried to scream. I tried to curse him, to tell him that he would pay for that. But my tongue felt like it weighed 10 pounds. And my vision was tunneling into darkness. The last thing I saw before they dragged me out the door was Gavin straightening his tie and picking up my car keys from the hook, looking around my kitchen like a king surveying a conquered kingdom, while Rachel stepped over my boots without looking down. They threw me into the back of a private ambulance, not a city one, and strapped me to the gurney. The engine roared to life, and as we pulled away from the only place on earth where I felt safe, I made a silent vow to Martha. I promised her that I would not die in the cage they were taking me to. I promised her that I would return, and when I did, there would be a reckoning, biblical in nature. The darkness swallowed me, whole, but even in the blackness, I could still hear the sound of Gavin's shoe hitting my dog's ribs, and that sound fueled a fire in my belly that no sedative could extinguish. I was not going to a nursing home to die. I was going to war, and my own children had just fired the first shot, without realizing they were shooting at a man who used to be known as the Hammer. The vibration of the road humming through the metal frame of the gurney was the first thing that pulled me back from the void. The sedative they had pumped into my neck was heavy, a thick gray fog that tried to keep me under, but my mind has always been a fortress that refuses to be breached easily. I kept my eyes closed, regulating my breathing to a slow, rhythmic, shallow draft, a trick I learned from a federal witness protection officer back in '95. If they thought I was still unconscious, they would keep talking. And if they kept talking, I would learn exactly how deep this grave they were digging for me actually went. From the front of the transport vehicle, the murmur of voices drifted back to me. It was Gavin, his voice high and tight with that manic energy he always gets when he smells money. He was on the phone first, probably with his bank or one of those sharks he owed money to. I heard him say the words liquidity event and asset seizure with a confidence that made my blood boil. Then the call ended, and he turned his attention to Rachel. "Honey, you have to stop crying," Gavin said, his tone dismissive, like he was scolding a toddler for spilling milk. "We did what we had to do." The judge signed the temporary order. It is legal. It is done. But he looked so scared, Gavin. Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. Did you see his eyes right before the injection? He looked at me like he hated me. He does not have the capacity to hate you, babe, Gavin replied, and I could practically hear the sneer in his voice. His brain is mush. That is what the doctor's report says. He is confused, aggressive, and living in filth. We are saving him from himself. Saving me. The irony was so thick I could taste it like bile. Lying there in the dark, my body paralyzed by their drugs, but my mind sharpening by the second memories of another life flooded back. They thought they were dealing with Tom, the old farmer who grew organic tomatoes and forgot to shave on Sundays. They had no idea they had just declared war on Thomas Calloway, the man the Chicago crime syndicates used to call the Hammer. 30 years ago, I was not wearing denim overalls covered in garden soil. I was wearing $3,000 custom suits, standing in federal courtrooms, staring down men who had dissolved their enemies in acid. I spent 2 decades building RICO cases that dismantled entire organizations. I knew how to find the one loose thread that would unravel a billion-dollar criminal empire. I retired to that farm to find peace, to wash the grime of the legal system off my soul, and to be with Martha. I chose a quiet life. I was not forced into it. But my son-in-law seemed to have forgotten that history, or perhaps he was just too arrogant to believe the old man still had any fight left in him. Immediately after we drop him off, I am heading back to the property with the locksmith. Gavin continued, and my ears pricked up. We need to change the tumblers before he tries to call anyone, not that he remembers any numbers. I already have the real estate agent lined up to do a walkthrough tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. They were not wasting a single second. You are moving too fast, Rachel said, sniffing. We haven't even sorted through Mom's things yet. Her clothes are still in the closet. We don't need to sort them, Rachel. We need to stage the house, Gavin snapped, losing his patience. Look, I spoke to the broker this morning. He ran the comps again. With the acreage and the barn even in its current condition, the land alone is worth $2.5 million conservative estimate. If we get a developer involved who wants to subdivide, we could be looking at $2.5 million. The number hung in the air of the ambulance. So that was the price tag on my life. That was the value of the 40 years Martha and I spent building that home, planting those trees, raising those ungrateful children. $2.5 million to cover Gavin's bad debts and failed business ventures. But what if he gets better? Rachel asked, her voice small and weak. What if the doctors at the facility say he is fine? What if he wakes up and calls his old friends? He still knows people, Gavin. Gavin laughed, a cruel barking sound. Who is he going to call? Most of his old friends are dead or in nursing homes themselves. And even if he does, who are they going to believe me? The successful tech CEO with a court order and medical evaluations stating he has advanced dementia, or a raving old lunatic who smells like chicken manure and thinks there is a conspiracy against him. He is a has-been, Rachel. He is done. Nobody listens to an old man who cannot even keep his own kitchen clean. I wanted to open my eyes right then. I wanted to sit up, rip the straps off my chest, and wrap my hands around his throat. I wanted to tell him that chicken manure washes off, but the stench of greed is permanent. But I stayed still. I let the rage crystallize into something colder, harder, and more useful. He had just given me the most valuable weapon in any legal battle. He had given me his motive. He was desperate. He was rushing. And men who rush make mistakes. The ambulance began to slow down, turning off the smooth pavement onto a gravel driveway. The suspension creaked, and I felt the vehicle lurch as it climbed a steep incline. We were not going to the city hospital. The city hospital was flat and paved. This was somewhere else. We are here, Gavin announced. Golden Horizons. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Better than he deserves, after the way he threatened me last week. I risked cracking one eye open, just a slit enough to see through my eyelashes, without giving myself away. Through the rear window, I saw a heavy iron gate sliding shut behind us. The fence was high, 12 feet at least, topped with what looked like razor wire disguised by ivy. This wasn't a retirement community. It was a holding facility, a place where families put their problems when they wanted them to disappear and stop asking questions. The building loomed ahead, a gray concrete block, trying to look welcoming, with fake shutters and a manicured lawn that looked too perfect to be real. There were no people sitting outside enjoying the afternoon sun. There were no open windows. It was a fortress designed to keep people in, not to keep the world out. The ambulance stopped with a jerk. The back doors flew open, letting in a rush of cold mountain air and the smell of industrial disinfectant. Two new orderlies appeared, their faces indifferent, their hands rough as they grabbed the gurney and pulled me out. As they wheeled me toward the entrance, I saw Gavin step out of the front seat. He adjusted his jacket, checked his reflection in the side mirror, and typed something quickly into his phone. He looked like a man who had just closed a big deal. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the father-in-law who had once loaned him the money to start his first company. He only saw an obstacle that had finally been removed. Oh. Rachel lingered by the car door, looking at the grim facade of the building. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "Dad," she whispered, barely audible over the wind. "I am so sorry." Sorry did not fix anything. Sorry did not unlock the gates. Sorry did not give me my life back. I let my head loll to the side, maintaining the act, but inside my mind was racing, cataloging every detail. The keypad on the main door, the location of the security cameras, the shift change schedule of the guards at the gate. They wheeled me through the automatic doors into a lobby that smelled of stale urine masked by lavender air freshener. The reception desk was behind bulletproof glass. The nurses moved with the efficiency of prison guards. "Welcome to Golden Horizons," a woman in a starched uniform said without smiling. "We will take it from here." Gavin handed over a thick file folder. My life, my rights, my freedom, all contained in a stack of papers forged by lies. "Make sure he is comfortable," Gavin said with a wink. "And by comfortable, I mean quiet. We do not want him agitating the other residents." "Understood, Mr. Miller," the woman said. "We have a special unit for difficult cases. Room 304 is prepared." As they pushed me down a long, fluorescent-lit corridor, away from the sunlight, away from my home, away from everything I knew, I made a new promise. Gavin thought he had buried a senile old farmer in a hole where no one would ever find him. He was wrong. He had just planted a landmine. And when I finally exploded, I was going to take his entire world down with me. The hammer was not dead. He was just biding his time in room 304. Room 304 was a white box designed to erase a man's soul. There was no clock on the wall to tell me if it was day or night. There were no pictures of my wife. There was no window view of the mountains I had spent 40 years looking at. Just 4 white walls, a bed with safety rails like a crib, and the constant hum of the fluorescent lights that buzzed like a trapped fly. They had taken everything from me. My wallet was gone. My belt was gone. Even my wedding ring, the simple gold band Patrice had placed on my finger in 1975, had been stripped away. They claimed it was for safekeeping company policy to prevent theft or self-harm, but I knew the truth. They were stripping away Thomas Calloway layer by layer until only a patient number remained. The staff treated me with that special kind of condescension reserved for toddlers and the dying. They spoke in high-pitched voices, slow and loud, assuming my hearing was gone along with my mind. But my hearing was fine. I heard everything. I heard the nurses complaining about their shifts. I heard the doctor in the hallway joking about how easy it was to sedate the new admission in 304. And I heard the silence of my own phone, which was locked away in a safe somewhere, cutting me off from the world. Twice a day, a nurse named Brenda would come in with a small paper cup. She was a large woman with tired eyes, who clearly hated her job. "Time for your candy, Tom," she would say, holding out a pill that looked like a blue Skittle. It was a heavy sedative, probably an antipsychotic, meant to turn a sharp mind into oatmeal. The first time I refused. They held me down and forced it. I learned my lesson quickly. Now I played the game. When Brenda came in, I would let my jaw go slack. I would stare blankly at a spot on the wall, drooling slightly. I would open my mouth like a baby bird. "Good boy," she would say, tossing the pill onto my tongue. She would hand me a cup of water and watch me swallow. I would gulp loudly, making a show of it. But I did not swallow. I tucked the pill deep under my tongue, holding it there against the burning bitterness until she left the room. The moment the door clicked shut, I would spit the dissolving chemical into the toilet and flush it away. It was risky. If they caught me, they would switch to injections. But I needed my mind. My mind was the only weapon I had left in this war. Without the drugs clouding my judgment, the fog began to lift. The old instincts of the federal prosecutor returned. I was not a prisoner. I was an undercover operative in hostile territory, and my mission was to find the cracks in their security. I spent hours sitting in the hallway in my wheelchair, pretending to be catatonic. To the staff, I was just another piece of furniture, an old man waiting to die. But behind my glazed eyes, I was recording everything. I watched the security camera mounted above the nurse's station. It was an old model. It rotated on a 45-second loop. For 7 seconds, every single minute, the corner of the hallway leading to the fire exit was a blind spot. 7 seconds was not a lot of time, but it was enough if you were fast. I watched the staff profiling them, just like I used to profile suspects. Most were indifferent, just doing their time. But there was one who stood out. The night orderly. His name tag said Jimmy. He was young, maybe 22, with dark circles under his eyes that matched mine. He smelled of stale tobacco and anxiety. I watched Jimmy closely. He was the weak link. Every night around 2 in the morning, when the floor was quiet, Jimmy would sneak to the fire exit at the end of the hall. He would take a small pebble from his pocket and wedge it into the doorframe, preventing the latch from locking. Then he would slip outside for 5 minutes to smoke. He was bypassing the alarm system because he was too lazy to walk down to the designated smoking area on the first floor. It was a massive security breach. It was my ticket out. But I needed more than just an exit. I needed a way to communicate. I needed a phone. I watched Jimmy when he thought no one was looking. He spent his shifts on his phone scrolling through banking apps and tuition payment portals. I heard him arguing with someone in hushed tones about being late on his student loan payments. He was broke. He was desperate. And desperate men are easy to negotiate with. I had built a career on flipping witnesses who were in financial holes. I knew exactly how to play him. But I had to wait for the right moment. On the 3rd day of my incarceration, the monotony was broken. The door to room 304 opened, and the smell of expensive cologne filled the sterile air before he even stepped inside. Gavin. He walked in wearing a casual polo shirt and slacks, looking like he had just come from a yacht club lunch. He held a generic get-well-soon balloon that bobbed against the ceiling tiles. He did not bring flowers. He did not bring photos of my grandchildren. He brought a balloon and a leather briefcase. "Hey, Tom," he said, his voice loud and fake cheerful. "You are looking great. Resting up." He closed the door behind him, and the smile dropped from his face instantly. He pulled the visitor chair close to my bed, invading my personal space. He looked tired. There was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip, even though the room was kept at a meat locker temperature. He was tapping his foot nervously against the linoleum floor. I stayed silent, maintaining my act. I stared past him, focusing on the white wall. "Cut the act, old man," Gavin hissed, leaning in so close I could see the pores on his nose. "I know you are in there. We need to talk business." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. It was thick, stapled, and flagged with yellow sticky notes where signatures were required. "This is a durable power of attorney," Gavin said, tapping the paper. "It gives me full control over your assets, your medical decisions, and your estate. I need you to sign it. Today." I slowly turned my head to look at him. I let a little bit of the old Tom surface, just enough to make him uncomfortable. Why I rasped my voice gravelly from days of disuse. Because the real estate market is volatile, Tom, he said too quickly. His eyes darted to the door and back. We have a cash buyer interested in the farm, a developer. They want to close next week. But they won't touch the deed unless I have clear authority to sell. If we wait for the competency hearing next month, the deal falls through. We lose the buyer. We lose the value. Next month. So there was a hearing. That was good to know. But why the rush? A farm in this part of Denver does not lose value in a month. Land is the one thing that always appreciates. If he was this desperate to sell immediately, likely at a discount to a cash buyer, it meant he needed liquid capital right now. I looked at his wrist. He was wearing a new watch, a Rolex Daytona. That was a $20,000 watch. And yet he was sweating about selling my $200,000 farmhouse. The math did not add up. Unless the debt was massive. Unless he was in a hole so deep that my farm was the only ladder out. I am not signing, I said clearly and firmly. Gavin's face turned a blotchy red. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the bruise the orderly had left 3 days ago. Listen to me, you stubborn fossil. You are never leaving this room. You are going to rot in here. But if you sign this, I can make your stay pleasant. I will get you a private room with a view. I will get you an iPad with Netflix. You can watch your westerns. You can have better food. Just sign the damn paper. He was bribing me with an iPad. He was threatening me with oblivion. But what he was really doing was showing me his hand. He was terrified. He was vibrating with panic. I pulled my arm away from his grip. Get out, I said. Gavin stood up, knocking the chair over. You are making a mistake, Tom. A big mistake. I am the only one who visits you. Rachel cannot bear to see you like this. If you do not help me, I cannot help you. He stormed out, leaving the papers on the bedside table, hoping I would change my mind. But as the door slammed shut, I did not look at the papers. I looked at the space where he had been standing. He was in trouble. Serious trouble. A man does not threaten his father-in-law over a real estate deal unless he has sharks circling him. He needed that money fast, which meant I had time but not much. If I did not sign, he would find another way. He would forge my signature. He would bribe a doctor to declare me incompetent sooner. I looked at the clock in the hallway through the open door. It was 7 p.m. Shift change was in an hour. Jimmy would be coming on duty. I reached under my mattress and pulled out the small stash of pills I had been saving. Not to take, but to trade. In prison, everything is currency. But here I had something better than pills. I had a target. Tonight I was going to make a deal with the devil. Tonight I was going to get a phone. And then I was going to find out exactly why my son-in-law was sweating through his $3,000 suit. The hammer was waking up, and the first nail was about to be driven. The clock inside my head ticked past 2 in the morning. The hallway outside room 304 was silent, save for the rhythmic humming of the industrial refrigerator down the hall and the occasional groan of a patient lost in a nightmare. I sat on the edge of my bed, my feet touching the cold linoleum. I had not slept. Sleep was a luxury for men who were free, and I was currently an inmate in a prison disguised as a care facility. I checked the hallway. Empty. The nurse at the station was engrossed in a magazine, her back to the corridor. This was it. The window of opportunity I had been calculating for 3 days. I stood up, my joints popping, and moved with a stealth that defied my 70 years. I wasn't shuffling like the medicated zombie they wanted me to be. I was moving with purpose. I reached the fire exit at the end of the hall. Just as I suspected, the heavy metal door was propped open a fraction of an inch by a small piece of folded cardboard. A thin stream of cold night air bled into the sterile warmth of the facility. I pushed it open just enough to slip through. Jimmy was there, leaning against the brick wall, the orange cherry of his cigarette glowing in the darkness. He jumped when he saw me, nearly dropping his smoke. He looked terrified, his eyes darting to the door I had just come through. "What are you doing out here, Mr. Calloway?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "You can't be out here. If the supervisor sees you, I am dead. You have to go back to bed right now." I didn't move. I stood my ground, letting the cold air sharpen my senses. I looked him up and down. He was wearing cheap sneakers that had seen better days, and a uniform that was slightly too big. He looked tired, the kind of deep bone-weary exhaustion that comes from working double shifts just to stay afloat. "I need a favor, Jimmy," I said, my voice low and steady, "and I am willing to pay for it." He laughed, a nervous, jittery sound. "You don't have any money, old-timer. They took your wallet when you checked in. You don't even have a stick of gum. Go back inside before I call the nurse." I reached into the pocket of my pajama pants. My hand closed around the cold metal of the watch I had managed to hide in my sock during admission. It was an Omega Seamaster Vintage 1965. It was the first thing I bought for myself when I made chief prosecutor. It was worth more than Jimmy's car. I pulled it out and let it catch the moonlight. Jimmy's eyes widened. He knew quality when he saw it. He stopped bringing the cigarette to his lips. "That is a nice watch," he said, his tone changing instantly. "Where did you get that?" I didn't answer. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out my wedding band. 18-karat gold, thick and heavy. I had worn it every day for 45 years. It felt like a part of my finger. Taking it off felt like amputation. But war requires sacrifice, and I was willing to bleed to win. I held both items out to him. The gold and the steel gleamed in the dim light. "This watch is worth $3,000 on the street, easy," I said. "The ring is worth another $500 in scrap gold alone. They are yours. Right now." No questions asked. Jimmy looked at the items, then at me, then back at the door. He licked his lips. Greed was warring with fear in his eyes. I had seen that look on 1,000 defendants before. Greed usually won. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I stepped closer. "I need a phone, Jimmy. A burner. Prepaid. Untraceable. And I need the staff Wi-Fi password." He shook his head violently. "No way. No way, man. If they find you with a phone, they will check the logs. They will know I gave it to you. I will lose my job. I can't risk that. I have tuition due next week." I stepped even closer, invading his personal space. I let the old Tom Calloway surface, the man who used to make mob enforcers sweat in the interrogation room. "Listen to me, son," I said, my voice hard as granite. "You are going to take this deal. You are going to go to your car or your locker or wherever you keep your stash, and you are going to get me a phone. Because if you don't, tomorrow morning, when the shift supervisor comes in, I am going to tell her that you have been selling sedatives to the patients on the second floor." Jimmy's jaw dropped. "That is a lie," he stammered. "I never did that." "It doesn't matter if it is a lie," I countered. "I used to be a federal prosecutor, Jimmy. I know how to build a narrative. I know how to plant doubt. Who are they going to believe? The confused old man, or the broke orderly who drives a beat-up Civic and owes money all over town? I will make you radioactive. You won't just lose this job. You will never work in healthcare again." I let the threat hang in the air. I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He realized he was trapped. He could take the bribe and get rich, or he could refuse and risk his future. It wasn't really a choice. "Fine," he spat out, snatching the watch and the ring from my hand. He shoved them deep into his pocket, looking around nervously. "I have a spare phone in my glove box. An old Android. I use it for music. It has minutes on it." "Go get it," I commanded. "And a charger. I will wait here." He disappeared into the darkness of the parking lot. I stood by the door, shivering, rubbing the empty spot on my ring finger. It felt naked. It felt wrong. I whispered a silent apology to Martha. I told her I was trading our symbol of love for a weapon to save our legacy. I knew she would understand. She was a fighter, too. 5 minutes later, Jimmy returned. He was breathless. He handed me a cracked black smartphone and a tangled charging cord. He also handed me a slip of paper with a string of numbers scrawled on it. There he said, "That is the phone. The password is on the paper. Now go. And if anyone asks you stole it from a visitor." I was never here. I took the phone. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than the gold I had given up. This was my lifeline. This was my sword. "One more thing, Jimmy," I said, stopping him before he could light another cigarette. "If you tell anyone about this, if you try to double-cross me to get a bonus from management, remember what I said. I might be in a bathrobe right now, but I still know judges. I still know cops. I can make your life very difficult from inside this room. Do we understand each other?" He nodded, pale and shaking. "We are good, Mr. Calloway. Just go." I slipped back inside the door, clicking softly behind me. I navigated the hallway like a ghost, the adrenaline pumping through my veins, masking the ache in my knees. I made it back to room 304 without seeing a soul. I crawled back into bed and pulled the thin, scratchy blanket up over my head, creating a small, private tent. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. I waited until my breathing slowed, listening for footsteps, for the sound of an alarm. Nothing. The facility slept on, unaware that the prisoner in 304 had just armed himself. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up, casting a blue glow on my face. The battery was at 40%. It was enough. I connected to the Wi-Fi using the code Jimmy gave me. The signal was strong. My fingers, usually steady, trembled slightly as I tapped the browser icon. I didn't go to news sites. I didn't check my email. I went straight to the one place that held the truth about my life and my property. The county clerk's public records database. I knew this system better than I knew the back of my own hand. I had spent 30 years combing through deeds, liens, and permits looking for evidence of fraud. Now I was looking for my own salvation. I typed in my address. The search bar spun for a second, then populated the results. I scrolled past the deed history, past the tax assessments. I was looking for recent filings. Filings that would explain why Gavin was sweating through his suits. Filings that would explain why a $2.5 million farm was suddenly a matter of life and death. And then I saw it. A filing dated 3 weeks ago. Not a property transfer. A zoning variance application. But not just any variance. It was filed by the Colorado Water Authority. I clicked on the document, squinting to read the small text on the cracked screen. My eyes scanned the legalese, translating it instantly into plain English. Proposed subterranean aqueduct project. Eminent domain assessment pending. I froze. An aqueduct. They were building a water pipeline. And according to the survey map attached to the file, the main junction, the most critical part of the infrastructure, was projected to run directly underneath my north pasture. I kept reading, my breath catching in my throat. The initial compensation offer for the easement rights and land usage was not $2 million. It wasn't $3 million. The estimated valuation for the water rights and land access was $12.4 million. I dropped the phone on my chest, staring up at the darkness of my blanket tent. $12 million. Gavin knew. He had to know. You don't try to rush a sale of a farm unless you know there is gold buried underneath it. Or in this case, water. He wasn't just trying to sell the farm to cover his debts. He was trying to steal a lottery ticket before I realized I was holding the winning numbers. But there was more. I sat up, re-engaging the screen. I opened a new tab. I needed to know about Gavin. I searched for his name in the civil court records. The results flooded the screen in red. Liens, lawsuits, a judgment from a venture capital firm for fraud. And then the kicker. A foreclosure notice on his penthouse filed 4 days ago. He was underwater. He was drowning. He owed $5 million to creditors who didn't look like the type to send polite letters. He needed my farm not just to get rich, but to stay alive. I looked at the glowing screen, a cold smile touching my lips for the first time in months. I had him. I had the motive. I had the crime. And now, thanks to a greedy orderly and a vintage watch, I had the means to bury him. But I needed to be smart. I couldn't just wave this phone around. I needed to get out of here. I needed to get to a judge. And I needed to do it before Gavin realized his timeline had just been cut in half. I turned off the phone and hid it inside my pillowcase. I lay back in the dark, my mind racing, plotting the next move. They thought they had locked away a senile old man. They were about to find out they had locked themselves in a cage with a wolf. I lay there in the suffocating darkness of my blanket tent, with the blue light of the cracked smartphone screen illuminating the lines of my face like a topographic map of my own misery. My fingers hovered over the search bar. A younger man, or perhaps a more frightened man, would have typed in symptoms of dementia or looked up the phone numbers for elder abuse hotlines, but I did not waste my limited data or my battery life on things that would only confirm what I already knew. I was not sick. I was being robbed. And to stop a robbery in progress, you do not call a doctor, you follow the money. I navigated to the Adams County Clerk and Recorder online database. It was a clunky government website that had not been updated since the early 2000s. But to me it was beautiful because it held the truth that people like Gavin tried to bury under layers of charisma and expensive suits. I typed in the parcel number of my farm. I knew it by heart. It was the same number I had written on tax checks for 40 years. The page loaded slowly, the spinning circle mocking my anxiety, until finally the records popped up. I expected to see the deed transfer, or perhaps a lien I did not know about, but what I saw was far more interesting. It was a zoning variance application filed 3 weeks ago. Not by me, not even by Gavin. It was filed by the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. I clicked on the attachment and squinted at the dense legal text. My eyes scanned the jargon with the practiced ease of a man who used to eat complex indictments for breakfast. Easement, subterranean rights, aquifer access. I switched tabs and pulled up the geological survey maps referenced in the filing. There it was, a massive blue vein running deep beneath the dry soil of the county. The Ogallala Aquifer extension. But it wasn't just water. It was a proposed extraction site. I kept digging following the digital paper trail until I found the acquisition proposal from a multinational beverage conglomerate called Pure Flow Holdings. They weren't just looking for water, they were looking for a regional bottling hub. I scrolled down to the valuation assessment. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I forgot I was hiding in a nursing home bed. The estimated value of the land with full water rights and mineral access was not $2.5 million. It was $12.4 million with an additional perpetual royalty clause for every gallon pumped. $12.4 million. The number danced before my eyes. This was generational wealth. This was the kind of money that builds libraries and funds scholarships. This was the kind of money that changes a family's name from ordinary to legacy. And Gavin was trying to sell it for a fraction of that amount to a developer next week. It did not make sense. Why would he rush to sell for $2.5 million when he could wait 6 months and get 12? Greed is usually patient when the payout is that big. Unless he couldn't wait. Unless he didn't have 6 months. Unless he didn't even have 6 weeks. I closed the property records and opened a new search tab. This time I typed in Gavin Miller. I didn't look at his LinkedIn profile or his curated Instagram feed where he posted pictures of his fake success. I went straight to the civil court dockets in Denver and Las Vegas. The screen filled with red flags. It was a bloodbath. Gavin's tech startup Neural Bridge was a ghost town. It had been dissolved by the state for failure to pay taxes 6 months ago. There were 3 lawsuits from angel investors alleging fraud and misappropriation of funds. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. I found a judgment lien filed just last week in Nevada. It wasn't from a bank. It was from a private holding company with a name that sounded legitimate but smelled like a front for loan sharks. The judgment was for $5.8 million. I scrolled further. There were foreclosure notices on his penthouse, repossession orders for his Tesla and Rachel's Range Rover. He was drowning. He wasn't just broke, he was underwater by millions and swimming with sharks who broke legs for interest payments. The picture finally came into focus, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. Gavin didn't care about the $12 million because he would be dead or in prison before that deal could close. He needed fast cash. He needed a fire sale. He needed to liquidate my farm immediately for $2.5 million to throw a chunk of meat to the wolves chasing him and buy himself another month of pretending to be a big shot. He was willing to burn $10 million of his own wife's inheritance just to save his own skin. I put the phone down on my chest and stared up at the fabric of the blanket. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the chill of absolute betrayal. I thought about Rachel, my little girl. Did she know? Was she an accomplice or just another victim of his lies? I remembered her face in the ambulance, the way she wouldn't look at me. She knew they were in trouble. Maybe she didn't know about the water rights. Maybe she didn't know about the sharks. But she knew they were stealing my home to pay for their mistakes. She had chosen her husband's lies over her father's life. They were not just greedy. Greedy I could handle. Greedy is human. This was parasitic. They were hollowing me out. They were selling the soil my wife walked on. They were selling the memories of 40 years. And they were doing it for pennies on the dollar, because they were too incompetent and corrupt to survive on their own. I picked up the phone again. My hand was steady now. The shaking had stopped. Rage has a way of steadying the nerves when you finally have a target. I took screenshots of everything. The zoning variants, the aquifer map, the valuation report, the lawsuits against Gavin, the foreclosure notices. I uploaded them all to a secure cloud account I hadn't used in 10 years, but still remembered the password to. I had the motive. I had the evidence. I had the weapon. But I couldn't use it from here. Not from a bed in a locked facility where they controlled my food and my freedom. If I showed my hand now, Gavin would panic. A desperate man who owes $5 million is capable of anything. If he found out, I knew he might try to accelerate the guardianship. He might try to drug me into a coma. He might try to stage an accident. I needed to be outside. I needed to stand before a judge not as a patient, but as a prosecutor. I checked the time on the phone. It was almost 3 in the morning. Outside, the rain was beginning to hammer against the window pane. A storm was rolling in off the Rockies. Good. Rain meant noise. Rain meant reduced visibility for the external cameras. Rain meant chaos. I sat up and swung my legs over the side of the bed. I looked at the door. I looked at the flimsy lock. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the phone. The tired old man with the sad eyes was gone. In his place was the hammer, and the hammer was about to break out of prison. I slipped the phone into my sock, pulling the elastic tight. I stood up and walked to the window, peering out at the wet asphalt of the parking lot below. It was a 12-foot drop to the grass. Doable. Painful, but doable. But the perimeter fence was the real problem. Then I remembered Jimmy. I remembered his smoking habit. I remembered the propped door. I turned back to the room. I stripped the sheets off the bed. I rolled the pillows into a long shape and tucked them under the blanket, creating a dummy that would fool a casual glance from the doorway during the next bed check. It was an old jailhouse trick I had seen 100 times in case files. Now I was using it. I put on my shoes, tying the laces tight. I took a deep breath, inhaling the stale air of the room for the last time. They wanted to sell my house. They wanted to steal my water. They wanted to bury me alive. I opened the door a crack and peered into the hallway. The night nurse was gone, probably on a break. The corridor stretched out before me, long and empty and white. It was time to go to war. The pillow dummy is the oldest trick in the book. Something you see in bad prison movies, but in the dim light of a nursing home room at 2 in the morning, it is surprisingly effective. I arranged the spare blankets over the pillows, creating the lump of a shoulder and the curve of a hip. I stepped back to the doorway, squinting in the semi-darkness. It looked enough like a sleeping old man to fool a tired nurse doing a bed check from the hallway. I checked the phone in my sock one last time, feeling the hard rectangular outline against my ankle. It was secure. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. I was 70 years old. I had arthritis in my knees and a bad back. I was about to walk out into a storm that was shaking the windows in their frames. But the alternative was staying here and letting Gavin sell my life out from under me. That was not an option. I slipped into the corridor. It was empty. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant hum of the vending machines. I moved towards the fire exit, my sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished floor. Every sound felt like a gunshot. I expected an alarm to blare, a hand to grab my shoulder, but nothing happened. I reached the door. I looked down. There it was, the small gray pebble Jimmy had wedged into the frame. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I pushed the crash bar gently. The door didn't click. It didn't alarm. It simply swung open and the world came rushing in. The wind hit me first, a cold, wet slap to the face that took my breath away. Then the rain driving sideways in sheets, soaking through my thin clothes in seconds. It was freezing, a bone-deep cold that usually sends men my age to the hospital, but to me it felt like freedom. It felt like waking up. I stepped out into the night and let the heavy metal door close behind me. I was out. But being out was only the first step. I was in a fenced courtyard, a holding pen for patients who wanted fresh air under supervision. The real barrier was 20 yards away. The perimeter fence. I ran through the mud, my feet slipping on the wet grass. The rain was my accomplice. It blurred the lenses of the security cameras mounted on the corners of the building. It drowned out the sound of my footsteps. It turned the world into a chaotic gray blur, where a fleeing old man was just another shadow. I reached the fence. It was chain-link 12 feet high, topped with an inward-facing overhang. No razor wire, thank God this wasn't a maximum security prison, but it was formidable enough. I looked up at it, rain streaming into my eyes. 30 years ago, I would have scaled this in 10 seconds. Tonight, I had to be smarter. I found a spot near the support post where the mesh was tighter. I jammed the toe of my sneaker into the diamond-shaped gap. I reached up, my fingers curling around the cold, wet steel. I pulled. Pain shot through my shoulders, hot and sharp. My joints screamed in protest. I gritted my teeth and pulled harder, hauling my body weight up against gravity. 1 step. 2 steps. I was 3 feet off the ground. My foot slipped on the wet metal, and I slammed my chest against the fence, knocking the wind out of me. I hung there for a moment, gasping, rain mixing with the sweat on my forehead. I could see Gavin's face in my mind. I could see him signing the papers. I could see him laughing with the bank manager. That image was better than adrenaline. I found my footing again. I climbed higher. 6 feet. 8 feet. I reached the top. The overhang was tricky. I had to swing my leg over, exposing myself to the full height of the drop on the other side. I threw my right leg over the bar. My center of gravity shifted. For a second, I was balanced on the precipice, suspended between the prison of the nursing home and the dangerous freedom of the night. Then my hand slipped. I didn't climb down. I fell. I plummeted 12 feet, the air rushing past my ears. I hit the ground hard. My shoulder took the brunt of the impact, slamming into the mud with a sickening thud. The breath was driven from my lungs in a violent whoosh. I rolled instinctively, protecting my head, and came to a stop in a puddle of freezing water. For a long minute, I just lay there. The pain was blinding. It radiated from my shoulder down to my fingertips. My hip throbbed. My face was pressed into the mud, the taste of dirt and blood in my mouth. where I had bitten my tongue. A younger man might have stayed down. A weaker man might have decided that this was too hard, that the warm bed inside was worth the surrender. But I was not weak. I was Thomas Calloway, and I had 12 million reasons to get up. I forced myself to my knees. I checked my limbs. Nothing seemed broken, just battered. I checked my sock. The phone was still there, intact. I wiped the mud from my eyes and stood up. I was swaying dizzy, soaked to the bone, and bleeding. But I was standing, and I was on the outside. I oriented myself. I knew where I was. The facility was built on the edge of the county near the old service roads. If I took the main highway, a patrol car would pick me up in 10 minutes. An old man walking in a storm is a police magnet. I had to take the back roads, the old logging trails that cut through the woods. It was 5 miles to town, 5 miles in a storm, 5 miles on a bad hip. I started walking, one foot in front of the other. The mud sucked at my shoes, trying to pull me back, but I kept moving. The wind howled through the trees, sounding like sirens, but I kept moving. Mile 1 was pure adrenaline. I was running on the high of the escape. Mile 2 was pain. The cold had settled into my muscles, making them stiff and unresponsive. My shoulder was throbbing, with a dull, heavy ache. By mile 3, I started to hallucinate slightly. Shadows in the trees looked like orderlies coming to drag me back. The sound of the rain sounded like Gavin's voice mocking me. "You are nothing, Tom. You are expired goods." I spoke out loud to the darkness to keep myself grounded. I recited case law. I recited the statutes for fraud, for embezzlement, for elder abuse. I built the indictment against my son-in-law step by step, mile by mile. People Vio, Gavin Miller. Count 1 grand larceny. Count 2 conspiracy. Count 3 being a son of a bitch. By mile 4, I couldn't feel my feet anymore. They were just heavy blocks of ice at the end of my legs. I stumbled and fell again, scraping my palms on the gravel. I lay there for a moment, the rain pounding on my back. It would be so easy to close my eyes. Just for a minute. No. I pushed myself up. I thought about the aquifer map. I thought about the water running beneath my land, pure and valuable. They wanted to steal it. They wanted to steal my legacy. I forced myself to stand. Finally, through the curtain of rain, I saw lights. Not the harsh floodlights of the facility, but the warm yellow glow of street lamps. I had made it to the edge of the suburbs. I navigated through the quiet streets, sticking to the shadows. I knew exactly where I was going. Dr. Murray's house was a mid-century ranch on a cul-de-sac, the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. I limped up the driveway. It was 4 in the morning. The house was dark asleep. I climbed the porch steps, my hand leaving a smear of mud on the white railing. I stood in front of the door, shivering violently, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they might crack. I raised my fist and knocked. 3 hard raps. I waited. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. A light flickered on inside. I heard footsteps, heavy and slow. The deadbolt slid back. The door opened. Dr. Murray stood there in a plaid robe, his hair mussed from sleep, a baseball bat in his hand. He looked ready to defend his home from an intruder. He looked down at the shivering, mud-caked, bleeding creature standing on his welcome mat. He squinted, adjusting his glasses. He looked at my face, trying to find a familiar feature beneath the grime and the exhaustion. Then his eyes went wide. He dropped the bat. "Tom," he breathed, his voice thick with shock. "You look like you just crawled out of your own grave." I tried to smile, but my face was too frozen. I looked him in the eye, summoning the last ounce of strength I had left. "Hello, Murray," I rasped. "I need a doctor. And then I need a lawyer. And then I need a drink." He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into the warmth of the hallway, shutting the storm out behind me. I had made it. The escape was over. Now the prosecution could begin. The warmth of the shower was almost painful, as it thawed the ice in my veins. But as the mud and blood swirled down the drain, I felt like I was washing away the victim and revealing the prosecutor underneath. Dr. Murray gave me a pair of flannel pajamas and a thick wool robe that smelled like cedar and old tobacco. I sat at his kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of tomato soup, the steam rising into my face like a blessing. My shoulder throbbed with a dull, insistent rhythm, but Murray had cleaned the wound and stitched the worst gash on my hip with the steady hands of a man who spent 40 years determining causes of death. He sat across from me watching me eat with a mixture of concern and professional curiosity. He didn't push. He didn't ask for the story until I had finished the bowl and pushed it away. Then he simply set up a tripod on his kitchen table and mounted a high-definition camera on it. "I need you to go on the record, Tom," he said, his voice grave. "If you are going to walk into that courtroom in 48 hours, we need empirical proof that your mind is sound. They have a paper trail of lies saying you are incompetent. We need a mountain of truth to bury them." I nodded. I understood the game. In a competency hearing, the burden of proof shifts. I was guilty of being old until proven sharp. "Turn it on," I said. The red light blinked. Murray began the standard battery of cognitive tests. He asked me the date, the president, the location. Child's play. Then he moved to the complex stuff. The mini mental state examination, followed by advanced logic puzzles and memory recall tests that would trip up a man half my age who hadn't had enough sleep. I didn't just answer the questions. I dissected them. I recited the text of the Fourth Amendment from memory. I calculated compound interest rates in my head. I listed the starting lineup of the 1998 Denver Broncos. I spoke for 40 minutes with absolute clarity, dismantling the narrative of the confused geriatric that Gavin had sold to the court. When we finished, Murray turned off the camera and let out a low whistle. He looked at his notes, then at me. "Your cognitive function isn't just intact, Tom," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You are testing in the 99th percentile. Your IQ is still clocking in at 135. Legally speaking, you are sharper than the judge who is going to hear your case. This video is a bulletproof vest." "Good," I said, standing up and testing my weight on my bad leg. It held. The shield is ready. Now I need a sword. I asked Murray for his phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, but one that I knew would always be answered. It rang twice. "Miller Investigations," a gruff voice answered. "Hello, Miller," I said. "It's Calloway." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that held the weight of 20 years of history. Miller had been a young FBI agent when I was the chief prosecutor. We had taken down the Valenti crime family together. He was the best investigator I had ever known, a man who could find a needle in a stack of needles. The hammer, Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. "I heard you retired. I heard you were growing corn and yelling at clouds." I replied. "But someone decided to burn my field down. I need you, Miller. I need you to do what you do best. I need you to dig into someone's life until you hit bedrock." "Name," Miller asked. No hesitation, no questions about payment. That was loyalty. "Gavin Miller," I said. "My son-in-law. And I don't just want dirt. I want felonies. I want bank fraud. I want wire fraud. I want a paper trail so thick he chokes on it." I gave him the details I had found on the burner phone. The zoning variants, the lawsuits, the debts. But I told him that was just the background noise. I needed the smoking gun. I needed to know what Gavin was doing right now today to cover his tracks. I hung up and looked at Murray. He was pouring 2 fingers of whiskey into a glass. He slid it across the table to me. "You are going to put him in prison, aren't you?" Murray asked quietly. "You aren't just trying to stop the sale of the house." I looked at the amber liquid. I thought about the way Gavin had kicked my dog. I thought about the way he had looked at me in the ambulance like I was trash to be disposed of. "He kidnapped me, Murray," I said, my voice cold. "He drugged me. He imprisoned me. And he is trying to steal the legacy I built for his own wife. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a criminal enterprise, and I am going to treat it like one. We spent the next 6 hours turning Murray's kitchen into a war room. I drafted affidavits on a legal pad. Murray printed out the medical evaluation and notarized it with his official seal. We were building a case brick by brick. Miller arrived at this back door 20 minutes later, carrying a waterproof tactical case and smelling of rain and cheap menthol cigarettes. He looked older than I remembered, his hairline receding and his waistline expanding. But his eyes were the same hard, flinty stones that had stared down cartel bosses for 2 decades. He did not offer a handshake or a hug. He just nodded at me and set the case on Murray's kitchen table, opening it to reveal a mobile command center that looked like it belonged in the Pentagon. He pulled up a file on the screen and spun the laptop around so I could see it. "Look at this, boss," he said, pointing to a timeline of transactions that looked like an EKG of a heart attack in progress. Gavin did not just borrow money from loan sharks. He has been running a shell game for 3 years, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. But Paul is a guy named Sergio who breaks fingers for late fees, and Peter is a shell company based in Panama. I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the data. Miller had unearthed in less than an hour. It was worse than I thought. Gavin had liquidated Rachel's retirement fund without her knowing. Forging her electronic signature on the release forms, he had maxed out 3 credit cards in my deceased wife's name before the estate was even settled. That hit me harder than the physical blow to my shoulder he had stolen from Martha. Even after she was gone, using her good name to fund his pathetic lifestyle of leased cars and fake prestige. "And there is more," Miller said, his voice dropping to a quiet growl. "Click on the folder marked Personnel." I clicked the trackpad, and a series of grainy, high-resolution photos popped up. They were surveillance shots taken over the last month, showing Gavin meeting with a man in a parked car outside a strip club on Colfaxwood Avenue. I recognized the man instantly, even though I had not seen his face in a decade. It was Benny. The roach Griggs, a low-level money launderer I had failed to convict in '98 because a key witness mysteriously disappeared before trial. "He is washing money," Tom Miller said, lighting a cigarette. "Despite Murray's glare, he is using your farm deal to clean cash for the syndicate. The water rights are just the cherry on top. The real play is the transaction itself, inflating the value to hide dirty money from the feds. If this sale goes through, you aren't just homeless. You are an accessory to a federal RICO predicate act. They are setting you up to be the patsy." I sat back in the chair, feeling the weight of the revelation settle onto my shoulders like lead. This wasn't just about saving my home anymore. It was about saving my soul. If Gavin sold that land to a front company utilizing my name as the seller, I would spend my final years in a federal indictment. Not a rocking chair. He wasn't just killing me financially. He was framing me for his crimes. "Do we have enough to nail Griggs too?" I asked the old prosecutor, instinct overriding the fatherly grief that was trying to claw its way out. Miller smiled, a wolfish grin that showed too many teeth. "We will, once we get the bank audio right now. Griggs is just a meeting, a coincidence, but if we catch Gavin admitting the source of the funds or the destination of the wire, we tie the knot around both their necks." I looked at the photos of my son-in-law shaking hands with a known criminal, and I felt the last vestige of hesitation evaporate. There was no family left to save, only a crime scene to clean up. "Pack it up," I said, standing and buttoning the borrowed jacket. "Let's go to the bank. I want to hear him say it. I want to hear him dig his own grave." "You should see the other guy," I replied. "What do you have?" Miller handed me a tablet. He had tapped into the bank's transaction logs. Do not ask me how he did it. Miller had friends in low places and high places, and he operated in the gray area between them. "Watch this," Miller said, pointing to a live feed of the transaction data. I watched as a transfer request appeared on the screen. It was originating from inside the bank from the manager's terminal. The amount was $200,000. The source account was the Callaway Family Trust, my pension fund, the fund that was supposed to support me until I died. But that account requires 2 signatures, I said, my blood turning to ice. Mine and a witness. Miller tapped the screen, bringing up the authorization document. There it was, my signature, a perfect forgery likely traced from old legal documents, and below it a stamp claiming it was authorized under an emergency power of attorney. But the emergency order the judge signed yesterday only covered medical decisions and immediate housing needs, I said, my voice shaking with rage. It did not grant financial access to the trust. That requires a separate hearing. Exactly, Miller said. Which means Gavin just walked into a federally insured bank, presented a fraudulent document, forged your signature, and convinced a manager to override the protocols. That is bank fraud. That is wire fraud. That is identity theft. And since the transaction crosses state lines to his creditor in Nevada, it is federal. I watched the screen as the status changed from pending to approved. The trap had snapped shut. Gavin hadn't just been greedy. He had been arrogant. He thought I was locked away in a padded room drooling on myself. He thought no one was watching. He didn't know that the hammer was sitting across the street watching him commit a felony in real time. He just stole $200,000 from me, I whispered. No, Miller corrected me, his voice grim. He just stole his own freedom. He just sentenced himself to 10 years in federal prison. I watched the front doors of the bank. A moment later, Gavin walked out. He was smiling. He was adjusting his sunglasses, looking like a man who had just won the lottery. He had the money. He thought he was safe. He thought he had won. He got into his leased Porsche and peeled away into traffic. I looked at Miller. Can you get me a copy of that transaction log, a certified copy? Miller pulled a USB drive from his pocket. Already done. Along with the IP logs showing the transfer originated from the manager's desk while Gavin was in the building. It is a slam dunk, Tom. I took the drive. It felt hot in my hand. This was it. The final nail. I had the medical proof. I had the motive. And now I had the crime. Take me back to Murray's, I said. I have to prepare my opening statement. Tomorrow morning I was going to walk into a courtroom. I was going to look my daughter in the eye. I was going to look at the man who tried to bury me. And I was going to show them that the only thing dangerous about Thomas Calloway was his memory. The storm outside had passed, but the real storm was just about to make landfall. And its name was justice. The sedan smelled of stale coffee and electronic ozone, a scent that instantly transported me back 20 years to the stakeouts of my prime. I sat in the passenger seat of Miller's nondescript Ford, a baseball cap pulled low over my eyes, and a pair of dark aviators shielding my face from the harsh afternoon sun. The suit Murray had lent me was tight in the shoulders and smelled faintly of mothballs, a constant reminder that I was wearing another man's skin, but it was better than the hospital gown or the mud-caked rags I had arrived in. Across the street, the First National Bank stood like a fortress of granite and glass, a monument to security that was about to be breached by a desperate man with a fountain pen. Miller adjusted the gain on the receiver unit that sat on the center console between us. The device was a black box with glowing green LEDs connected to a directional antenna that was currently pointed at the second-floor corner office. Miller had called in a favor with an old contact, a janitor at the bank, who owed him for making a DUI charge disappear a decade ago. The bug was planted directly under the mahogany desk of the branch manager, a man named Sterling, who had the reputation of being flexible with regulations if the commission was high enough. He is late, Miller grunted, checking his watch. Narcissists are never on time, boss. They think the world waits for them. He will be here, I said, my eyes fixed on the entrance. He is desperate, and desperate men run on a clock that ticks faster than everyone else's. Almost on cue, Gavin's silver Porsche screeched into the parking lot, taking the turn too fast and nearly clipping the curb. He parked in a handicap spot, ignoring the blue lines, which was just a minor metaphor for how he lived his entire life. He stepped out of his car, and even from 50 yards away, I could see the cracks in his armor. His suit was wrinkled at the back, his tie was loosened, and he was pacing toward the bank doors with the frantic energy of an addict looking for a fix. He wasn't the smooth tech CEO anymore. He was a man with a $5 million noose tightening around his neck. "Here we go," Miller said, sliding headphones over his ears and handing a second pair to me. I put them on. The world outside fell silent, replaced by the amplified ambient noise of the manager's office. I heard the hum of the air conditioner, the squeak of a leather chair, and then the heavy thud of the door being thrown open. "Mr. Miller," the voice of the manager came through, oily and nervous. "I did not expect you without an appointment. We usually require cut the crap, Sterling." Gavin's voice cut through the static, loud and distorted by his proximity to the microphone. "I don't have time for pleasantries. I need the transfer authorized. Now." There was a pause, the sound of papers being shuffled. I could picture Sterling shifting in his chair, sweating. "Gavin, we discussed this," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The emergency guardianship order you faxed over, it is for medical and residential decisions. It is very specific. It does not explicitly grant you power over the primary asset accounts or the equity line of credit. The legal department flagged it this morning. They are saying we need a conservatorship ruling from a probate judge before we can release funds of this magnitude." I heard the sound of a fist hitting the desk. It made me flinch. "To hell with your legal department," Gavin screamed. "The old man is vegetable. His brain is mush. I am his only living relative besides my wife, and she signs whatever I tell her to sign. That money is effectively mine. It is just sitting there rotting while I have liquidity issues that need to be solved today. Not next week. Today. I need you to understand my position," Sterling stammered. "If the old man wakes up, if he contests this—" "He is not going to wake up," Gavin yelled, and the venom in his voice turned my blood to ice. "He is locked away in Golden Horizons on a cocktail of drugs that would put a horse in a coma. I made sure of it. He doesn't know what day it is. He doesn't know his own name. He is gone, Sterling. He is a ghost. And ghosts don't sue banks." I looked at Miller. He was typing furiously on his laptop, logging the time codes of every admission. I sat there, a ghost in a borrowed suit, listening to my executioner explain why I was already dead. There was a silence on the tape, then the sound of a zipper. "Look." Gavin's voice dropped, becoming smooth, seductive, the voice he used to con investors. "I know you are taking a risk. I appreciate that. That is why I brought this." I heard a heavy thud like a stack of cash hitting the wood. $10,000, Gavin said. "For your trouble. For pushing the override button. And when the property sells next week, I will move the entire $12 million deposit into this branch. Think about what that will do for your quarterly bonus, Sterling. You will be regional manager by Christmas." Bribery. Commercial bribery. Add it to the list. Sterling cleared his throat. The sound of greed winning over caution. "And the signature?" Sterling asked. "The withdrawal form requires Mr. Calloway's signature." "Already done," Gavin said. "I signed it this morning. His hand is shaky these days, you know. Parkinson's or something. But it is his signature." I guided his hand. It was a lie. A blatant, verifiable lie. He had forged my signature while I was miles away. "Okay," Sterling said, his voice resigned but eager. "Okay. I will process it as a hardship withdrawal against the home equity. $500,000. Wire transfer to Neural Bridge Holdings." "No." Gavin corrected him quickly. "Wire it to this account number. It is a holding company in Nevada. The loan shark. He was paying off the most dangerous debt first." I heard the tapping of a keyboard. The sound of a printer whirring. The digital sounds of my equity being drained away by a man who hated me. "It is done," Sterling said. "The wire is initiated. It should clear within the hour." "You are a lifesaver, Sterling." Gavin said, the relief evident in his voice. "You really are. I won't forget this." Gavin's footsteps receded. The door opened and closed. The office went silent again, save for the heavy breathing of a corrupt banker counting his bribe. I took off the headphones and placed them on the dashboard. My hands were shaking, not from fear, not from age, but from the sheer force of the rage I was suppressing. I looked out the window. Gavin was walking out of the bank. He stopped on the sidewalk, took a deep breath of the polluted city air, and smiled. It was the smile of a man who thinks he has gotten away with murder. He checked his watch, got back into his Porsche, and drove away, unaware that he had just signed his own federal indictment. I looked at Miller. Did we get it all? Every word Miller said, ejecting the digital storage card. Conspiracy to commit bank fraud, wire fraud, forgery, elder abuse, commercial bribery. And since the wire went to Nevada, we have interstate commerce jurisdiction. This isn't just a local case anymore, Tom. This is FBI territory. This is 10 years minimum. I took the storage card. It was so small, a tiny piece of plastic, but it held the weight of my vindication. We have the medical eval, I said, ticking off the items on my mental checklist. We have the proof of the water rights value. We have the evidence of his debts. And now we have him on tape committing a felony in real time. Miller looked at me, his expression serious. You know what happens next, right? Once we play this card, there is no going back. You are sending the father of your future grandchild to prison. You are destroying your daughter's marriage. I looked at the bank, then down at my hands. I wasn't seeing the hands of a victim. I was seeing the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime upholding the law. He made his choice when he drugged me and threw me in a cage, I said softly. He made his choice when he decided my life was worth less than his debt. I am not destroying his marriage, Miller. I am saving my family from a parasite. I checked the dashboard clock. It was 4 in the afternoon. The competency hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. 17 hours. I turned to Miller. Take me back to Murray's. I have to draft an affidavit. I have to prepare my exhibits. And Miller, yeah, boss. Do you still have that contact at the tailor's on 16th Street? The one who used to make my trial suits? Yeah, old man Giovanni. He is still there. Good, I said, adjusting the collar of the borrowed jacket that didn't quite fit. Take me there first. If I am going to walk into a courtroom and end a man's life, I am not going to do it smelling like mothballs. I want the charcoal gray wool, the 3-piece, and I want a red tie. Miller grinned, starting the engine. A power tie. I like it. The hammer is coming back. Miller, I said, watching the bank disappear in the rearview mirror. And he is bringing the whole toolbox. Miller turned the key in the ignition, but I put my hand on his arm, stopping him. The engine idled, a low rumble that vibrated through the seat. I looked at the digital storage card in my hand. The plastic warm from my grip, it was enough to indict Gavin, but it wasn't enough to save the farm, not completely digital. Records could be challenged. Motions could be filed to suppress evidence based on how we obtained it. I needed the ironclad proof, the original deed with the raised seal of the trust, which I had hidden in a place Gavin would never think to look. Turn the car around. Miller, I said, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, take me home. Miller looked at me like I had lost my mind. Boss, you cannot go back there, he said, his voice tight with warning. Gavin has changed the locks. He probably has private security watching the place. If you get caught trespassing on your own property before the hearing, you violate the emergency order and the judge will lock you up for real. This time I know the risks, replied my voice steady, but I left the original trust documents inside the hollow newel post at the bottom of the staircase. Martha and I put them there 20 years ago. Gavin does not know about the hiding spot, but he has a dumpster rented for tomorrow morning. If he guts the house, he throws away the only piece of paper that proves I do not own that land. Without that physical document, it becomes a battle of digital records, and he has expensive lawyers who can delay that for years. I need the paper, Miller. Miller sighed, a long, heavy exhale of smoke. He knew better than to argue with me when I had that tone. He put the car in gear and pulled out into traffic, merging onto the highway that led out of the city and back toward the mountains. The drive was silent, the tension inside the car thick enough to choke on, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and black. We arrived at the perimeter of my property. An hour later, darkness had fallen completely, which was my only advantage. Miller parked the car on the old logging road a half-mile back, killing the lights. "Wait here," I told him. "If I am not back in 20 minutes, leave." I slipped out of the car and into the tall grass, and the smell of the earth hitting me like a physical blow. It smelled of rain and pine and home. I moved through the fields I had tilled for decades, my feet finding the path by muscle memory alone. The farmhouse loomed ahead, dark and silent against the night sky. But there was a car in the driveway. Rachel's Range Rover. My heart clenched. Seeing her car there meant she was inside. Seeing her car there meant I wasn't just breaking into a house. I was invading the territory of the daughter who had betrayed me, but I kept moving, crouching low, moving shadow to shadow until I reached the back porch, the one I had built the summer. Rachel turned 10. I tried the back door, locked tight, brand new, deadbolt. Gavin hadn't lied about the locksmith. I moved to the kitchen window, the one with the latch that always stuck if you didn't jiggle it right. Pulled a thin blade from my pocket, a tool Miller had given me, and worked it between the sash and the frame. With a soft click, the latch gave way. I slid the window up and climbed over the sink, dropping silently onto the kitchen floor. The house smelled wrong. It didn't smell like coffee and baking bread anymore. It smelled of cleaning chemicals and emptiness. I moved through the kitchen, my eyes adjusting to the gloom, and that is when I saw it. The first knife in my heart. The kitchen was stripped bare, my collection of cast iron skillets gone. The handmade ceramic mugs Martha loved gone in the corner, sat 3 large black contractor bags bulging with trash. I walked over and untied the top of the nearest one. Inside, I saw blue fabric. It was Martha's favorite Sunday dress, the one she wore to church, shoved in with coffee grounds and old newspapers. I felt a sound try to escape my throat, a roar of pure grief. But I swallowed it down, turning it into fuel. They weren't just selling the house, they were erasing us. They were treating 40 years of life like garbage to be hauled away. I heard footsteps overhead, heavy and slow on the floorboards. Someone was upstairs in the master bedroom. I froze, pressing myself into the shadows of the hallway. The footsteps moved to the landing and then started down the stairs. I slipped into the coat closet, leaving the door cracked just a fraction of an inch. Through the gap, I saw Rachel descend the stairs. She was holding a glass of wine in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked exhausted, her makeup smeared, her posture slumped. She wasn't the confident woman from the ambulance. She looked like a ghost, haunting her own childhood. She sat on the bottom step, right next to the newel post where the documents were hidden. She took a long drink of wine and put the phone to her ear. "Gavin," she said, her voice slurring slightly. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep throwing Mom's things away. It feels wrong." I held my breath, a tiny spark of hope flickering in my chest. Maybe she was waking up. Maybe my little girl was still in there somewhere. I listened to the silence as Gavin spoke on the other end. Then Rachel sighed, shaking her head. "I know we need the money, Gavin." "I know about the sharks," she said. And those words extinguished the spark instantly. She knew about the loan sharks. She knew about the danger, and she was still helping him do it. "But why did we have to put him in that place?" she continued, her voice whining now. "Couldn't we have just moved him to an apartment? Selling the farm is one thing. But locking him up, I feel sick, Gavin." She listened again, and then she laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Yeah, I guess you are right. He probably wouldn't have agreed to sell. You know how stubborn he is about this." "Dirt fine, I will finish bagging up the bedroom. But I am leaving the heavy stuff for the movers tomorrow. Just make sure the wire hits the account by noon. I don't want to be here when they come to change the locks again." She stood up, draining the glass, and walked back up the stairs. her heels clicking on the wood like hammer strikes on a coffin nail. She wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice. She had traded her conscience for safety. She was willing to let her father rot in a drugged haze as long as the check cleared and the threats stopped. I waited until I heard her bedroom door close overhead, then I moved. I stepped out of the closet and knelt by the newel post. I pried up the decorative cap, which looked solid to the naked eye, inside rolled tightly in a waterproof tube, were the original trust documents and the deed. I pulled them out, tucking them into my jacket against my chest. I had what I came for. But as I turned to leave, I saw headlights sweep across the front window. A car was pulling into the driveway, fast gravel crunching under tires. I moved to the window and peered out through the blinds. It was a black SUV, unauthorized, dark tint illegal plates. The door opened and two men got out. They weren't movers and they certainly weren't bankers. They were big, wearing leather jackets and carrying themselves with the heavy, menacing gravity of men who hurt people for a living. One of them took out a phone and dialed. I heard Rachel's phone ringing upstairs. She answered, and a moment later she came running down the stairs, looking terrified. She opened the front door. "Bruno," she said, her voice shaking. "Gavin said, you wouldn't be coming here until tomorrow. Plans changed, sweetheart," the big man said, stepping into the foyer and pushing past her. His voice was like gravel in a blender. "Gavin missed a payment today, the interest payment. He told us he wired it, but the bank flagged it, something about a fraud alert." My heart hammered against my ribs. The bank transfer. Miller and I had watched it go through, but the bank's internal systems must have flagged it as suspicious because of the location or the amount. Gavin's stalling tactic had failed, and now the wolves were at the door. "So we are here to inspect the collateral," the man continued, looking around the living room with a sneer, "making sure you didn't burn it down for the insurance money before we can take title. You got a nice place here, shame. It smells like old people." "Please," Rachel begged, backing away. "Just leave. Gavin will fix this. He always fixes it." The man laughed. "Fixing it is over. We are taking the inventory. Anything of value comes with us tonight. Consider it a down payment." They started moving through the house, knocking things over, checking the silver, pulling paintings off the walls. I was trapped. The back door was locked from the inside with a deadbolt that needed a key. I didn't have the window. I came in through was too exposed. They would see me running across the yard. I had to hide. I had to wait them out. I retreated back into the shadows of the kitchen, squeezing myself into the narrow gap between the refrigerator and the wall. It was a tight fit, dust bunnies and old receipts cluttering the floor. I held my breath, clutching the documents to my chest. One of the men walked into the kitchen. He was eating an apple he had taken from the bowl on the counter. He opened the cupboards, slamming them shut, looking for liquor or cash. He stopped right in front of the refrigerator. I could see his boots, heavy steel-toed work boots caked with mud. He paused, sniffing the air. "Smells like wet dog in here," he grunted. He reached for the refrigerator handle, pulling the door open. The light from inside the fridge spilled out, illuminating the floor inches from my feet. If he looked down, if he turned his head 5 degrees to the left, it was over. I wasn't. The hammer right. Then I was just an old man hiding in the dust, praying for invisibility. He grabbed a beer, popped the cap, and kicked the door shut, moving back into the living room. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I listened as they ransacked my home, listening to Rachel sobbing in the corner, listening to them break the things I had built with my hands. They stayed for 20 minutes, taking the TV, the silverware, and my tool collection from the hall closet. Finally, the big man spoke again. "Tell Gavin he has 24 hours. After that, we don't take stuff, we take fingers." The front door slammed. The SUV engine roared, and they were gone. I waited another 10 minutes until Rachel went back upstairs, crying softly. Then I slipped out the kitchen window, dropping into the mud of the backyard. I ran for the tree line, not looking back, running through the fields in the dark, clutching the papers that proved I was still the master of my own fate. When I got back to Miller's car, I was shaking violently. The adrenaline crash hitting me hard. Miller looked at me, saw the papers in my hand, and the look in my eyes. "You got it," he asked. "I got it," I said, climbing into the car, but I got something else too. What I got the absolute certainty that I am doing the right thing, Drive Miller, I said, staring straight ahead into the darkness. Drive. Fast tomorrow we go to court. And tomorrow I take back everything they stole, not just the house but the truth. Miller put the car in gear, and we tore away from the farm, leaving the ghosts behind, ready to face the monsters in the daylight. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open at 8:55 in the morning, and the stale air of the family court hit me with a scent I had not smelled in 10 years. It was a mixture of floor wax, cheap coffee, and the distinct metallic tang of human misery that permeates every room where families go to destroy each other. I paused in the doorway for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the artificial light and taking the measure of the battlefield before me. At the plaintiff's table, sitting on the right side of the aisle, were my executioners. My daughter Rachel and my son-in-law Gavin looked like they had just stepped out of a photo shoot for a lifestyle magazine. Rachel was wearing a cream-colored skirt suit that probably cost more than my first car, her hair perfectly blown out, her face made up to look sympathetic but firm. The grieving daughter forced to make the hard choice, Gavin sat beside her, radiating the kind of arrogant energy that usually precedes a massive fall. He was wearing a slate gray Italian-cut suit, his posture relaxed, his arm draped over the back of Rachel's chair as if he were at a country club, brunch rather than a hearing, to strip a man of his civil rights. Next to them sat their lawyer, a man I recognized by reputation, if not by face. His name was Sterling Vance, no relation to the banker. Just another predator in a $3,000 suit. He was known as the Shark in Divorce, circles a man who specialized in hiding assets and crushing the opposition with mountains of paperwork. He was currently checking his emails on a tablet, looking bored, looking like he had already spent the commission he was going to make from the sale of my farm. I took a deep breath and stepped into the room. I was not wearing the hospital gown. I was not wearing the mud-stained rags from my escape. I was wearing armor. It was a charcoal blue three-piece suit cut from English wool, tailored for me in 1995 by Giovanni, the best tailor in Denver. It was the suit I had worn when I prosecuted the corrupt mayor. It was the suit I had worn when I sent the leadership of the Aryan Brotherhood to Supermax. I had lost 20 pounds since Martha died, and another 5 in the nursing home, so the jacket hung a little loose on my shoulders, and the trousers broke a little too low on the shoe, but that only added to the effect. I did not look like a senile old man. I looked like a lion in winter. Lean, hungry, and dangerous. I had paired it with a crisp white shirt, starched until it could cut glass, and a silk tie in a shade of deep blood red, the power tie, the color of war. As I walked down the center aisle, the sound of my polished Oxfords echoing on the parquet floor, heads began to turn. The few spectators, mostly other lawyers waiting for their docket, looked up with mild interest. But when I reached the defendant's table, the reaction from the plaintiff's side was immediate and visceral. Rachel looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of guilt, but she buried it. Quickly, under a layer of mockery, she leaned into Gavin and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Oh my God, look at him. He must have dug that out of the back of the closet. Does he think it is 1995? He looks like he is playing dress-up." She giggled, a cruel, high-pitched sound that was meant to belittle, to reduce me to a child playing a game. She covered her mouth with a manicured hand, her eyes dancing with amusement. She saw the loose fit of the jacket and interpreted it as frailty. She saw the vintage cut and interpreted it as obsolescence. She did not see the man inside the suit. Gavin shook his head slowly, a smirk playing on his lips. He did not even bother to lower his voice. "Let him have his costume, honey," he said dismissively. "It makes him feel important. It is sad, really, like watching a kid wear his dad's clothes. He thinks he can just walk in here and intimidate us, but the law does not care about fashion statements from the last century." Their lawyer Vance looked up from his tablet and scanned me with cold, dead eyes. He saw that I was alone, that there was no counsel beside me, no paralegal stacking files. He saw a pro se defendant, an old man representing himself, and I saw him relax visibly. In his world, a man who represents himself has a fool for a client. He leaned over to Gavin and whispered, "Do not worry, this will be over in 10 minutes. Pro se defendants always hang themselves. He does not know the procedure. He does not know the statutes. We will bury him under paper before he even opens his mouth." I ignored them. I did not look at Rachel. I did not look at Gavin. I walked to the defendant's table and set down my briefcase. It was an old leather attaché, scarred and worn from decades of use. Unlike Gavin's pristine designer bag, mine looked like it had been through a war because it had. I sat down and deliberately unpacked my life. I placed the stack of affidavits in the center. I placed the USB drive containing the bank fraud evidence to the right. I placed the medical evaluation from Dr. Murray to the left, and finally I placed a single yellow legal pad and a gold fountain pen in front of me. I aligned them with military precision, creating a workspace of absolute order in the chaos of the courtroom. Gavin laughed again, watching my ritual. Look at him, lining up his pencils. He thinks he is back in the office, dreaming of the glory days. "Hey Tom, do you remember what year it is? Do you need a nurse to help you find the bathroom?" I slowly turned my head and looked at him for the first time since I entered the room. I did not speak, I did not frown. I simply fixed him with a stare, a look devoid of any emotion other than absolute certainty. It was the look I used to give defendants right before I played the tape that put them away for life. Gavin's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting away, unable to hold the contact. He shifted in his chair, adjusting his tie, suddenly uncomfortable in his expensive skin. The air in the room seemed to change the temperature, dropping a few degrees. The mockery from the other table died down, replaced by a tense silence. They could feel it, even if they did not understand it, yet they were sensing the presence of a predator. But they were too arrogant to realize they were the prey. I checked my watch. The same vintage Omega I had recovered from Jimmy, the orderly. It was 8:59. I folded my hands on the table and waited, my heart rate slow and steady, my mind clear as a bell. The door behind the judge's bench opened, and the bailiff, a heavy-set man with a bored expression, stepped forward. He cleared his throat, and his voice boomed through the courtroom, shattering the silence. "All rise," the bailiff shouted. "Department 4 is now in session." The Honorable Judge Anthony Russo presiding. At the sound of that name, a small, genuine smile touched my lips. For the first time in weeks, Rachel and Gavin stood up quickly, trying to look respectful, playing their parts, but they did not know the history of this room. They did not know that 20 years ago, Anthony Russo had been a junior prosecutor in my office. They did not know that I had mentored him, that I had taught him everything he knew about the law, about integrity, and about spotting a liar from 100 paces. Anthony Russo was known as the Bull in legal circles. He was a man who hated three things above all else: disrespect for the law, elder abuse, and people who wasted his time. Rachel and Gavin had managed to achieve the trifecta. The judge swept into the room, his black robes billowing around him like storm clouds. He was a small man with a shock of white hair and eyes that could cut through steel. He climbed the steps to the bench and sat down, arranging his files with sharp, jerky movements. He looked angry. He always looked angry. He picked up the first file on the docket and peered over his reading glasses, scanning the room. He did not look at me yet. He looked at the plaintiff's table. Case number 4922, Miller versus Callaway, petition for permanent conservatorship and liquidation of assets. He read, his voice gravelly and impatient. "Counselors, state your appearances, Sterling." Vance stood up, smoothing his jacket. "Good morning, Your Honor. Sterling Vance, representing the petitioners, Gavin Miller and Rachel Miller, who are present." And for the defense, Judge Russo barked, looking at the empty space beside me where a lawyer should be. I stood up slowly, buttoning my jacket. I squared my shoulders and looked up at the bench at the man I had once hired right out of law school, Thomas Callaway, for the defense. "Your Honor," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room, clear and strong. "I am appearing pro se Sterling Vance stood up and buttoned his expensive jacket with the practiced smoothness of a man who charges $500 an hour to destroy families. He walked to the center of the room and placed his hands on the podium, looking at Judge Russo with a grave expression that was entirely manufactured. He began his opening statement with a voice dripping with false sympathy, telling the court that this was a tragedy, that no child should ever have to force their parent into care, but that the evidence was irrefutable. He painted a picture of a man in rapid decline, a man who was a danger to himself and others, a man whose mind had eroded to the point of incompetence, Your Honor, Vance said, his voice echoing in the silent room. We have submitted video evidence obtained by my clients that clearly demonstrates the defendant's advanced state of confusion and disorientation. If it pleases the court, I would like to play Exhibit A. Judge Russo nodded, without looking up from his notes, and the large screen on the wall flickered to life. It was a video taken on a cell phone, shaky and vertical, showing me in the local supermarket 3 weeks ago. In the footage, I was standing in the canned goods aisle, looking around quickly, my head turning left and right, my movements jerky and anxious. Vance paused the video at the moment I looked most distressed. As you can see, Vance narrated, his tone somber. Mr. Calloway is lost in a familiar environment. He does not know where he is or what he is doing. He is paranoid, looking for threats that do not exist. This is a classic symptom of advanced dementia, combined with the incident involving the gas stove, which his daughter will testify to it, paints a clear and heartbreaking picture of a man who can no longer function in society without strict supervision. I sat there watching myself on the screen, and I felt a cold fury rising in my chest, because I remembered that day perfectly. I was not lost, and I was not paranoid. I was evading a man named Bruno, a debt collector for the local bookie who I knew was looking for Gavin to collect a $50,000 gambling debt. I had spotted him near the produce section and was checking the aisles to make sure I could exit without being seen. I was not confused. I was protecting my son-in-law from a broken kneecap, and this was how he repaid me, by editing the footage to make me look like a senile old fool. Rachel wiped a fake tear from her eye, and Gavin put a comforting arm around her shoulders, shaking his head sadly at the screen playing the part of the concerned family. To perfection, they were good. I had to give them that. They were very good at the performance, but they had forgotten that a trial is not a theater. It is a coliseum. And you do not bring actors to a fight. You bring gladiators. Sterling Vance finished his speech with a flourish, stating that the only humane option was to grant full permanent guardianship to Gavin and Rachel Miller, allowing them to liquidate my assets to pay for my long-term care in a secure facility. He sat down looking satisfied, looking like a man who had just earned his commission. The courtroom went silent. All eyes turned to the judge, awaiting his ruling, or at least his acknowledgement of the defense. Judge Russo adjusted his reading glasses and pulled the case file closer to him. He opened the folder and looked at the cover sheet for the first time, really reading the name of the defendant, Thomas Edward Calloway. He read aloud, his voice automatic and bored, but then he stopped. He froze completely. His eyes stayed fixed on the paper, his hand hovering over the page as if he was afraid to touch it. He blinked once, then twice, and read the name again, this time moving his lips slightly. He looked up, slowly, peering over the rim of his glasses, his gaze finding me at the defendant's table. He squinted, trying to reconcile the image of the old man in the vintage suit with the memory etched into his brain from 20 years ago. I saw the moment of recognition hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened, his jaw went slack, and the color drained from his face, leaving him ghostly pale. He looked at the file again, then back at me. His hands were trembling now, shaking so hard the papers rustled audibly in the quiet room. He leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper, but in the pin-drop silence of the court, it sounded like a shout. I smiled, a cold, humorless stretching of lips. I walked out from behind the table, moving into the center of the well. I did not walk like a man of 70. I walked like a man who owned the floor. I am quite sure, Your Honor, I said. I do not need counsel because I am not here to defend myself against these absurd allegations of incompetence. I am here to correct a mistake. Gavin stood up, his face flushing red with anger. Your Honor, I object, he shouted. This is highly irregular. He is just trying to confuse the issue. He is sick. He needs help. Sit down. Mr. Miller, Judge Russo barked, slamming his gavel down with a violence that made everyone jump. You will speak when spoken to, and not a moment before, or I will hold you in contempt. Do I make myself clear? Gavin sat down slowly, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked at Rachel, but she was staring at me with a look of dawning horror. She was finally realizing that she didn't just forget to visit me, she had forgotten who I was. She had forgotten that before I was the old man who grew tomatoes, I was the man who put the mafia in prison. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I continued, my voice steady and calm. The petitioners claim I am confused. They claim I am a danger to myself. They claim I cannot manage my own affairs because I forgot to wash a dish and walked down the wrong aisle in a supermarket. I paused, walking over to my table and picking up the first stack of documents. But I would argue that true incompetence is underestimating your opponent. I would argue that true incompetence is filling a sworn affidavit with lies that can be disproven in 5 minutes. I handed the medical evaluation to the bailiff. Exhibit A, I said loudly, a comprehensive cognitive evaluation performed yesterday by Dr. Robert Murray, former chief medical examiner. It includes a video deposition stating that my cognitive faculties are in the 99th percentile for my age group. I am not senile. Your Honor, I am. Or just disappointed. I turned to face Gavin directly for the first time, and I am not here just to prove that I am sane, Your Honor. That would be a waste of this court's time. I am here for a much more specific reason. I picked up the USB drive, the one containing the evidence of the wire transfer, the forgery, and the bribery. I held it up so the light caught the small silver chip. I am not here to defend myself, I said, my voice dropping to a growl that rumbled through the floorboards. I am here to report a crime in progress. I am here to press federal charges against the petitioner for bank fraud, wire fraud, forgery, and the abuse of a vulnerable adult. The silence in the room broke. Gavin leaped to his feet, screaming that I was a liar, that I was crazy. Rachel burst into tears, burying her face in her hands, but I didn't look at them. I looked at Judge Russo, and I saw him nod, a slow, grim nod of understanding. The hammer had dropped, and the trial had just begun. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The bailiff moved to restore order, but Judge Russo did not even flinch. He was focused entirely on the evidence I had just presented. I watched Gavin's face transform from rage to panic as he realized the magnitude of the trap he had walked into. Sterling Vance, the shark who had promised him an easy victory, was now distancing himself physically, sliding his chair away as if Gavin were contagious with a felony. Conviction, Mr. Miller. Judge Russo said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Sit down before I have you shackled. This is not a suggestion. Gavin collapsed into his chair, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Rachel was sobbing openly, now her mascara running down her cheeks. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for mercy, for a fatherly intervention that would make all the bad things go away. But I did not look at her. I looked at the evidence piled on my table. Your Honor, I said, stepping back to the podium, my voice steady and relentless. I would like to submit Exhibit B into evidence. I picked up the large zoning map and the water rights assessment I had printed from the burner phone. The petitioners claim that my property is a burden, a dilapidated farm with a market value of $2.5 million that needs to be liquidated immediately for my own care. I handed the documents to the clerk. They claim this sale is urgent because the market is volatile, but the truth is far simpler and far greedier. Judge Russo accepted the documents, adjusting his glasses as he scanned the geological surveys and the valuation report. His eyebrows shot up. This property sits directly atop the newly surveyed extension of the Ogallala Aquifer, I explained, my voice echoing in the hush of the courtroom. The Colorado Water Authority has already filed for eminent domain access, and a multinational beverage conglomerate has submitted a preliminary acquisition proposal. The value of the land, with full water rights, is not $2.5 million, sure. Honor, it is $12.4 million with perpetual mineral royalties. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Even the board lawyers waiting for their cases sat up and took notice. $12 million changes everything. It changes the narrative from a sad story about an old man to a criminal conspiracy about grand larceny. I turned to face Gavin. His face was a mask of terror. He knew. I knew he knew that his secret lifeline, his way out of debt, was now public record. Mr. Miller has $5.8 million in gambling debts and predatory loans. I continued pulling out the credit reports and court judgments from Nevada. He is facing foreclosure on his home and repossession of his vehicles. He did not file this guardianship petition to protect me, Your Honor. He filed it to steal $12 million to pay off his bookies before they broke his legs. Objection, Vance shouted, standing up, but his voice lacked conviction. Your Honor, this is speculation. This is character assassination. It is not speculation if it is documented. Fact, I countered, handing the financial records to the bailiff. Exhibit C, Your Honor, judgments. Liens and foreclosure notices, all public record, all dated within the last 6 months. Judge Russo looked at the financial documents. Then at Gavin, his expression hardened into the look he used to give drug traffickers who tried to claim they were just holding the package for a friend. Mr. Vance, the judge, said, his voice cold. Do you have any evidence to refute these claims? Because right now it looks like your client is using this court to facilitate a major financial crime. Vance stammered, looking at Gavin for an explanation. But finding none, Gavin stood up, his face purple with rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me. It doesn't matter, he screamed, losing all control. It doesn't matter how much debt I have or how much the land is worth. I am his guardian. I have the power of attorney. He is incompetent. He is old. He needs a manager. I'm the only one who can make these decisions for him. I smiled a slow, cold smile that I had been saving for this exact moment. Actually, Gavin, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone that carried more weight than a shout. You don't? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the final document. It was an old piece of parchment yellowed with age, protected in a plastic sleeve. The seal on the bottom was embossed and official. You see, I continued walking toward the bench. When Martha got sick 15 years ago, I knew I had to protect our legacy, and I knew that if something happened to me, vultures might circle, so I made a decision. I handed the document to Judge Russo, and I placed the farm into an irrevocable trust in 2005. I said the words hanging in the air, like a guillotine blade. I do not own the farm, Your Honor. I only have a life estate. I have the right to live there until I die. But the title, the ownership, it does not belong to me, and it certainly does not belong to my heirs. Gavin looked confused, his brow furrowed. Irrevocable trust. What does that mean? It means you can't sell it, I said, turning to him. It means you can't mortgage it. It means you committed bank fraud yesterday by borrowing against an asset that I do not even own. Judge Russo looked up from the document, a small grim smile playing on his lips. And who is the beneficiary of this trust? Mr. Calloway, the judge asked. I looked at Rachel, who was staring at me with horror, realizing that her inheritance had just evaporated. I looked at Gavin, who was realizing that he was not just broke. He was going to prison. The beneficiary is the Disabled American Veterans Fund, I said, my voice ringing with pride. The property goes to wounded soldiers upon my death to build a rehabilitation center. You tried to steal from veterans. Gavin, you tried to defraud a charity. Gavin slumped back into his chair, his eyes blank, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The fight had gone out of him, the arrogance was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. Judge Russo slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Petition denied with prejudice, the judge barked. Bailiff, take Mr. Miller into custody immediately on suspicion of bank fraud, wire fraud, and elder abuse. I am referring this entire matter to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. 2 bailiffs moved in flanking Gavin. They pulled him out of his chair and cuffed his hands behind his back. He didn't fight. He just stared at the floor. Defeated, broken. Rachel screamed a raw sound of despair, reaching for him, but he was already being led away. I gathered my papers, stacking them neatly back into my briefcase. I walked past the plaintiff's table where Vance was frantically packing his bag, trying to leave before he could be implicated. Rachel looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Daddy," she whispered, "please help us." I stopped and looked at her for a long moment. I remembered the little girl I used to carry. On my shoulders, I remembered the woman who let her husband drug me and drag me out of my own home. "You made your choice, Rachel," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "You chose him over me. You chose money over family. Now you have neither." I turned and walked out of the courtroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind me, the sound of the chaos inside fading away. I walked down the hall, past the curious onlookers, past the other lawyers. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Denver sunlight. Agent Miller was waiting for me by the curb, leaning against his car. He smiled when he saw me. "Did you get him, boss?" he asked. "I got him," I said. Taking a deep breath of the fresh air, I got them all. We drove to a small diner on the outskirts of town, a place with vinyl booths and bad coffee. I sat in a booth by the window, watching the world go by. I ordered a black coffee, no sugar, just the way I liked it. I took a sip, letting the bitter liquid scald my tongue. It tasted like freedom. It tasted like victory. I was 70 years old. I was alone, my wife was gone, my children were gone, but I was still here. I was still standing. The hammer had dropped one last time, and the echo would last forever. The gavel strike still echoed in my ears as I sat in that booth watching the world move on. The lesson was brutal but necessary. Trust is not a birthright. It is earned currency, and family is defined by loyalty, not blood. I had spent years protecting those who only saw me as a resource, confusing enablement with love. But by reclaiming my agency, by standing tall in that courtroom, I didn't just save my assets, I saved my dignity. Sometimes the hardest fight is against those you raised, but surviving it proves that even when stripped of everything, your integrity remains the one thing no one can steal. If you have ever felt underestimated by those closest to you, or if you are fighting to protect your own legacy against betrayal, share your story in the comments. You are not alone. Subscribe for more stories of justice, resilience, and the unyielding power of truth. The hammer is always listening.